All right, so today we're going to be diving into some pretty fascinating ideas
Oh, yeah.
from Dr. Gail Brenner.
Okay.
She's a clinical psychologist. And the topic is something that I think, let's be honest, we all kind of deal with suffering.
Yeah.
But what if suffering is optional?
It's a big question, right?
It is a big question.
A bold claim.
Yeah.
And what I think is so interesting is how she approaches this.
Yeah.
She kind of blends traditional psychology with a more spiritual lens, almost like a Buddhist kind of approach to this idea that the suffering we experience, especially that which comes from feeling inadequate, isn't something we're just stuck with.
We're not just doomed to suffer.
Yeah. And it's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about understanding how our minds create this sense of not enough.
Right. And so we've got excerpts from her book.
Okay.
Suffering is Optional. And then also some endorsements from other people that really highlight how practical her approach is.
It's not just vague self-help.
Right.
She gives you tools and practices.
Yeah.
And at the heart of her work is this idea of what she calls the separate self.
Okay.
Which is this identity that we construct based on past experiences and often limiting beliefs. And so she argues that that's really where our suffering takes root.
Okay. So this idea of the self that we create, is that what leads to suffering?
Yeah.
Right. And she uses this really striking anecdote to illustrate this. And it's this little girl at a hotel pool.
Oh, wow.
And she's completely ignored by her parents while other kids are, playing and having fun.
Oh, it's that.
Brenner witnessed this herself.
Wow.
And it really highlights how early experiences can shape our sense of self-worth and create those not enough feelings that can really stick with us.
Yeah, for years.
That's a powerful example.
It is. That child is longing for connection and then begins to identify with feeling invisible.
Right.
And then that shapes how she interacts with the world,
Wow.
always from this place of lack.
Okay, so you're saying that this separate self is a construct.
Yes.
It's not who we truly are.
Exactly.
Okay, so then how do we even begin to untangle ourselves from this?
Well, that's where she introduces these 4 guiding principles and 5 core practices.
Got it.
So the principles offer a new way to understand suffering.
Okay.
And the practices give us the tools to actually shift our perspective.
To actually implement that new understanding.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's break down these principles a little bit.
Okay.
So the first one is how feelings of not being enough come from distorted thinking.
Right.
So it's like we're seeing ourselves and the world and others through this very limited lens.
Yeah, it challenges this assumption that our suffering is just based on objective reality.
Oh, interesting.
And says, no, actually, it's largely due to the stories we tell ourselves. Okay.
The interpretations we're laying on top of our experience, which are often negative.
Okay, so it's not necessarily what's happening.
Right.
It's how we're perceiving it.
Exactly.
Okay.
About the meaning we're making.
Okay, got it. And then the second principle feels like this is the crux of her message.
Yeah.
She says that the feeling of unworthiness is optional.
It is.
No matter how real it seems, we don't have to be defined by it.
We don't.
So you're not just saying, think positive thoughts.
No.
How is this different?
This is about recognizing that those thoughts are just thoughts.
Okay.
They're not the truth of who we are.
Okay.
And that recognition opens up the possibility of choice.
Okay.
We can choose to disentangle from that ingrained sense of inadequacy and reconnect with a deeper sense of wholeness.
But how do we do that?
That's where the practices come in.
That's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
Okay, so these practices provide a way to actually experience this, not just understand it intellectually. Yeah, to shift away from that separate self and tap into something more.
Okay, got it. And the first one might seem simple, but it's actually quite profound.
Okay.
Turning towards your experience.
Interesting.
So she points out how often we try to avoid difficult feelings.
Right, we distract ourselves.
We're really good at that.
We are.
But she's saying that true freedom comes from facing those emotions head on.
Yeah.
So how do we do that without getting overwhelmed?
It's about meeting those feelings with openness and curiosity rather than resistance.
Okay.
And doing it with kindness and compassion. Not beating ourselves up, but offering ourselves the same understanding we would offer a loved one.
So self-compassion is key here.
Absolutely.
All right.
It allows us to be present with our experience without judgment.
Yeah.
Which creates that safe space for healing.
Okay. So she doesn't stop there.
No.
She then encourages us to find the safe haven of being aware.
Yes, this is the second core practice.
Okay.
And it's about recognizing the space in which all of those thoughts and feelings arise.
Sorry.
This is very much aligned with Buddhist mindfulness practices.
Right.
We're not our thoughts,
right.
We're not our emotions, but we are the awareness that experiences them.
The awareness is the constant.
Yes.
That's a good way to think about it.
It's always there even when our thoughts are racing.
Yeah.
And our emotions are all over the place.
Okay, so she even offers this simple exercise.
Oh, great.
Close your eyes and ask yourself, am I aware?
And the answer is always yes.
Yes.
That awareness is our constant companion.
That's actually really reassuring.
It is.
To know that's always there.
Yeah.
Okay, so once we're familiar with this space of awareness, where do we go from there?
That leads us to practice number 3.
Okay.
And this is where it gets interesting.
All right.
Losing interest in thoughts.
Wait, how do you lose interest in thoughts?
I know, right?
We're supposed to, analyze them, figure them out?
Well, we're so used to being caught up in our thoughts, believing everything our minds tell us.
Yeah.
But she challenges that habit.
Right.
She asks us to step back and observe those thoughts without getting swept away by them.
So you're saying we don't have to believe everything we think?
We don't.
That's a pretty radical concept.
It is.
Okay.
Think of it this way. We don't believe everything we read in the newspaper.
Right.
Right? We can read it.
Right.
We can consider it.
Right.
But ultimately, we decide for ourselves what we choose to believe.
Yeah.
The same applies to our thoughts.
Okay, so instead of getting caught up in the drama of our thoughts,
Yeah.
we can choose to observe them without judgment.
Without judgment.
Especially the ones that are telling us we're not good enough.
Yes. Those are the ones that fuel our suffering.
Or smart enough or worthy of love.
Right. All those thoughts that say we're not enough.
Yeah.
And she argues that those thoughts are not the truth of who we are.
Right.
They're just mental noise.
They're just chatter.
Exactly. And we can learn to turn down the volume.
Okay, how do we actually do that?
Well, one technique she suggests is recognizing that thoughts are really just sounds with meaning attached.
Okay.
So we can practice hearing those sounds without automatically buying into the meaning.
Okay.
Like separating the sound of the words from the story that they're telling.
That's interesting.
It takes practice, of course.
Yeah.
But it's a game changer.
I can imagine.
When we stop identifying with those negative thoughts, they lose their power to make us suffer.
So we're not at their mercy anymore.
Exactly.
It's like we have the remote control for our minds.
Yeah.
And we can choose what channels we tune into.
I love that.
Okay.
That's a great analogy.
And the beauty is that when we do that,
Yeah.
it opens up this whole new world of possibility.
Yes.
So when we're not constantly preoccupied with, all of our flaws,
Yeah.
we can connect more deeply,
Yeah.
pursue our passions with more energy, and just enjoy life more fully.
It's like stepping out of a dark room. Yeah.
And into this vast open field.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Okay, so can you give a concrete example of what
Yeah.
this would look like for someone to actually apply this idea?
Yeah, imagine someone who constantly beats themselves up for canceling appointments.
Okay.
They think, oh, I'm so flaky.
Yeah.
I always let people down.
Mm-hmm.
Using Brenner's approach, they would first recognize that those are just thoughts, not facts.
Okay.
Right? And then they would practice observing those thoughts without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps even noticing the physical sensations that arise with them.
Yeah.
And over time, they might find themselves less bothered by cancellations,
Interesting.
more able to make decisions
Yeah.
without the weight of that self-criticism.
It's not about denying the situation,
Right.
but changing how we relate to it internally.
Exactly.
Okay, this is getting good.
Yeah.
I'm definitely feeling the potential here.
It's powerful stuff.
Okay. This idea of losing interest
Yeah.
in those negative thought patterns.
It's pretty mind-blowing. But what about our emotions? It feels like those are harder to just ignore.
Right. That's where core practice number 4 comes in.
Okay.
Welcoming feelings.
Okay.
And again, it's not about suppression or pretending everything is fine,
Right.
but learning to meet our emotions with a sense of acceptance, even kindness.
That sounds almost impossible.
I know.
Especially when we're talking about sadness, anger, fear.
Right.
Who wants to welcome those?
Yeah, it's a natural instinct.
Right.
To want to avoid those.
We run away.
But she points out that emotions are a natural part of being human.
Okay.
It's the resistance to them
Okay.
that causes the problem.
So instead of fighting our feelings, we should be befriending them.
Befriending them.
Yeah.
But how... Think about it this way. When we resist an emotion,
Okay.
it's like refusing to acknowledge a guest who's come to our house.
Okay.
They're still there, lurking, creating unease.
Right.
But if we invite them in, offer them a cup of tea, they might just relax and reveal themselves to be less threatening.
Okay, so the key is to approach those feelings with curiosity rather than judgment.
Exactly.
Okay.
She suggests paying attention to the physical sensations that accompany our emotions.
Okay.
Because we often get so caught up in the mental story.
Yeah.
Why am I feeling this way?
Right.
That we forget to even notice what's happening in our bodies.
Yeah, so it's not just about the mental chatter, but tuning into the physical experience.
The physical experience.
Okay.
Exactly. Notice the tightness in your chest,
Yeah.
the clenching of your jaw, the quickening of your breath. Those are the language of your emotions.
Okay.
And by simply acknowledging those sensations without trying to change them, we create a space for them to move through us.
So allowing that emotion to exist without getting completely swept away.
Without getting swept away.
Does she offer any specific techniques for, like...
She does.
Working with difficult emotions?
One she recommends is simply naming them.
Okay.
When a strong feeling arises, say to yourself, hello, anger.
Hello, anger.
Hello, sadness.
Okay.
That simple act of labeling creates a little bit of distance between you and the emotion.
So it's less about I am angry.
Right.
And more about, there's anger.
Yes. It helps you recognize that you are not the feeling itself, but the awareness that is experiencing it.
Okay, got it.
Another technique is to focus on your breath.
Okay.
When we're overwhelmed by emotion, our breath often becomes very shallow and constricted.
Right.
And so by consciously deepening your breath, you're sending a message to your nervous system that it's okay to relax, to let go of the tension.
Like giving ourselves permission to calm down.
Exactly.
Even when things feel really intense.
Even when things feel intense. And as you practice welcoming your feelings, you cultivate a sense of self-acceptance that goes beyond your emotional state.
Right.
You learn that it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling. Your worthiness isn't dependent upon those emotions.
This is huge.
Yeah.
We're so conditioned to judge ourselves for feeling negative emotions.
Yeah.
But she's saying all emotions are valid.
They are.
They have a purpose. They can teach us something.
They can teach us a lot.
It's about moving from self-criticism to self-compassion.
Absolutely.
Embracing all parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
Even the messy ones.
There's even the messy ones.
Okay, and this leads us beautifully into core practice number 5. The sacred return.
The sacred return.
Okay, what is that?
It's about coming home to yourself.
Okay.
To that awareness that's always present. The essence of who you are, beyond all the stories and identities that you've created.
Like returning to a familiar place after a long journey.
Yeah, that's a beautiful analogy.
There's a sense of peace, of belonging.
Exactly. And she argues that this sacred return is always available to us.
Okay.
No matter what our circumstances are.
So it's not a destination, but a state of being we access by simply shifting our attention.
Exactly.
So it's about remembering who we truly are.
Yes.
Beyond the limitations of that separate self
that
we talked about earlier.
And that remembrance isn't a one-time thing.
Okay.
It's an ongoing practice. We inevitably get caught up in our thoughts and emotions again.
Right.
But each time we notice that happening, it's an opportunity to return to that awareness.
Okay.
To reconnect with our true nature.
It's like having this compass.
Yes.
That always points us in the right direction.
That's a great way to put it.
No matter how lost we feel.
Yeah.
Okay, but how does this translate into daily life?
Yeah.
How do we live this awakened life?
Right.
In the midst of, all the demands and the challenges of our modern world?
Well, she addresses that directly.
Okay.
And one key point is the importance of befriending fear.
Fear. That's a big one.
It is a big one.
For so many of us.
For so many of us.
It feels like fear is what keeps us stuck.
Yeah, it prevents us from taking risks. And really going after what we want.
Right.
It's like this invisible wall that we build around ourselves.
Right.
Protecting us from perceived danger, but also preventing us from experiencing the fullness of life.
So she's saying the first step to overcoming fear is to get to know it.
Get to know it.
To become familiar with its tactics.
Exactly.
Like studying the enemy's playbook.
Yes.
So we can kind of anticipate their moves.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she points out that fear often manifests in our bodies as tension, tightness, unease. So pay attention to those physical sensations.
Okay.
Notice where you hold fear in your body.
So bringing mindfulness to those physical experiences.
Exactly. And it's similar to welcoming feelings.
Right.
Bring awareness to those sensations without judging them or trying to change them.
Okay, so what about the mental side of fear?
Well, fear also shows up in our minds as a lot of negative self-talk, doubts, and those limiting beliefs we talked about earlier. It's that voice that says, you're not good enough, you're going to fail, you shouldn't even bother trying.
That inner critic can be brutal. You can feel so real and so persuasive.
But we don't have to believe it.
We don't?
We have a choice.
Okay.
We can question those thoughts.
Right.
Challenge their validity.
Okay.
And recognize that they're often based on past experiences or beliefs that may not even be true anymore.
So how do we start to shift that pattern?
Well, one technique she suggests is practicing saying yes instead of no.
Okay.
You know, we so often automatically default to no out of fear.
Yeah, we've got that no button permanently pressed.
We do. It's like our default.
Yeah.
And she encourages us to experiment with consciously pressing the yes button.
Okay.
To open ourselves to new experiences, even if they feel a little bit scary.
So this takes courage.
It does.
It's about stepping outside our comfort zone.
Yeah.
Embracing the unknown.
Embracing the unknown.
Okay.
But the rewards can be transformative. When we say yes to life, we open ourselves up to a whole new world of possibilities.
It's like waking up from a dream.
Yeah.
And realizing we've been living this much smaller version of ourselves.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And this awakening is not a one-time event.
Oh.
It's an ongoing process.
Right.
We'll inevitably encounter fear again.
Right.
But each time we do, we have a chance to practice these tools and techniques that she offers.
Right.
To choose courage over fear.
Yeah.
And to step more fully into the life that's waiting for us.
It's about reclaiming our power.
Yes.
Recognizing that we're not victims of our circumstances, but creators of our own reality.
Beautiful.
And it's not about achieving some perfect state of fearlessness.
No.
It's about befriending fear.
Befriending fear.
Recognizing it as a natural part of the human experience.
Yes.
And using it as a catalyst for growth.
Beautiful.
So even in the midst of fear, we can choose love. We can choose joy.
Right.
We can choose to live a life that's full of meaning and purpose.
Absolutely.
This is powerful stuff.
It is.
And, you know, as we cultivate this inner strength, we become less reactive to the ups and downs of life.
We do.
And we develop a sense of equanimity that allows us to navigate challenges with more grace and resilience.
You become like one of those trees that can bend with the wind without breaking.
Okay, but how does this play out in our relationships with others?
Right.
Can this approach really impact?
Absolutely. It's all connected.
Okay.
One of the things she emphasizes is this idea of interconnectedness.
Okay.
That we're not separate individuals, but we're part of this larger web of life.
Yeah, this idea of interconnectedness, you know, it feels like it's at the heart of so many spiritual traditions.
It is.
Is this where, like, her Buddhist influences really come into play?
Yeah, definitely. She reminds us that even when we're struggling, we're all connected.
Yeah.
You know, part of this incredible unfolding of life.
Yeah.
And when we tap into that awareness, it can be such a powerful antidote to those feelings of isolation and inadequacy that we all experience.
Yeah, it's like realizing we're all drops in the same ocean. You know?
Yes.
Unique, but part of something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a pretty amazing concept when you think about it.
It is.
So it's not just a feel-good idea.
Right.
But it's something that we can actually cultivate.
Yes.
Did you give any guidance on, like, how to experience this in our daily lives?
Well, one practice she recommends is spending time in nature.
Oh, okay.
You know, it's a powerful teacher.
Yeah.
When we immerse ourselves in the natural world, we can't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder.
Right.
And we see that interconnectedness firsthand.
It's like getting a direct download from the source code of existence.
I love that.
You know, seeing how it all works together.
Yeah.
And it reminds us that we're part of that too.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Another practice she suggests is seeing the divine in others.
Yes.
Okay. That one might be a little harder.
It can be.
Especially when we're dealing with difficult people. So you're saying we can try to see beyond the surface behavior to, like, the essence of who they are.
It's a practice of radical compassion.
Okay.
Choosing to see the best in others, even when they're not showing us their best.
Right.
It can be challenging, but it's also incredibly transformative.
Okay. So it feels like it would change our relationships.
It does.
In a pretty fundamental way.
It does.
So instead of approaching people from a place of judgment and separation,
Yeah.
we're coming from a place of understanding and connection.
It's a shift from us versus them to a recognition of our shared humanity.
Right.
And that can be incredibly healing, both for ourselves and for the world around us.
So to bring it all back to Brenner's core message, she's offering a roadmap.
She is.
To a more awakened life.
Yes.
A life that's free from unnecessary suffering, filled with peace, joy, and connection.
It's not about achieving some perfect state of enlightenment,
right,
but about embracing the fullness of our human experience, the messy parts and the beautiful parts, and recognizing that inherent wholeness that resides within us all.
Remembering that we're not broken, we're not lacking, we're not alone.
We're not.
We are already complete.
We are.
Just as we are.
And it leaves us with a question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If suffering is truly optional, what would it look like for you to choose a life of peace and freedom?
Yeah.
What would you need to let go of? And what new possibilities might open up?
Wow, that's a really powerful invitation.
It is.
And a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive today.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for being here. And may you find peace, joy, and a deep knowing of who you truly are.